Jill Biden insults John Kennedy. John's one-line comeback leaves the nation stunned. The grand ballroom of the Washington, D.C. Convention Center shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, their glow bouncing off polished marble floors. The Unity for America Women's Summit radiated elegance, the air alive with anticipation as political elites, philanthropists, and journalists mingled. Their conversations floated in a low hum beneath the soft clink of champagne glasses. Though billed as a nonpartisan celebration of women's leadership, the event had drawn a wide-ranging audience, from senators' spouses to grassroots organizers, all dressed to perfection. At the heart of the room, a stage draped in navy velvet and adorned with white roses awaited the keynote speakers. Among them was John Kennedy of Louisiana, famous for his sharp wit and folksy charm, invited to speak on bipartisan cooperation. Across the stage stood Jill Biden, former First Lady, her presence polished yet edged with tension. She wore a tailored emerald dress, her smile polite but tight, her eyes flicking toward John with a hint of irritation. The strain between them was quiet but undeniable, rooted in years of political friction. Yet no one expected what would unfold. John Kennedy stepped onto the stage, his navy suit crisp, his stride steady. His salt and pepper hair caught the light as he offered his easy grin to familiar faces. He'd attended countless high-profile events, but tonight carried a charged energy, like the stillness before a summer storm. The moderator, a seasoned journalist with a warm but firm poise, announced the evening's agenda before calling John and Jill forward for a ceremonial photo meant to symbolize unity. The audience applauded, cameras snapping as the two approached. John extended a friendly hand, but Jill's smile trembled for the briefest moment. As they leaned in for the photo, she whispered sharply, just loud enough for him alone, still chasing headlines, "You political opportunist." The jab was surgical, calculated, and it hit its mark. John froze, his hand suspended mid-air as his eyes locked on hers. The crowd kept applauding, unaware, but for John the room narrowed to just the two of them. Her stare held a quiet dare, challenging him to respond. That he felt the sting, not just as an insult, but as a dismissal of his entire career. He could let it slide, smile for the cameras, pretend it never happened. But something in her tone, that smug bite, stirred something deeper. He straightened, turning to her fully. His voice came out low, steady, but unmistakably firm, cutting through the air like a blade. "I'm no opportunist, Jill. I just fight for what's right. Something you might have forgotten how to do." The words detonated between them. The moderator's smile faltered. Photographers paused mid-click. A wave of gasps rippled through the front rows, those close enough to hear the exchange. Jill's face flushed, her eyes widening as the weight of his response landed. A hush fell over the ballroom. John stepped back to his place, calm but unyielding. Jill struggled to recover, smoothing her dress, forcing a brittle smile as she tried to regain composure. It might have ended quietly, just an awkward moment lost in the evening's pomp, if not for the cameras. Reporters had caught everything. And within minutes, clips hit social media, hashtags erupted. Kennedy strikes back. Jill versus John. The internet caught fire. Some praised John's sharp comeback, others scolded both for letting tempers flare in public. But everyone agreed on one thing: the moment was extraordinary. Back on stage, the moderator scrambled to steady the program, guiding the speakers to their seats. John settled in, his posture relaxed but his mind racing through Jill's words. Politics had always been brutal, but this felt different, personal. A precise attempt to undercut him in front of the nation's most influential crowd. He glanced at Jill across the stage. She avoided his gaze, eyes fixed on the audience. He wondered what resentment had finally boiled over, and why tonight. The keynote speeches began, but John remained distracted. He'd come to talk about unity, about bridging divides in a fractured nation. Yet Jill's attack reminded him of the unspoken battles beneath Washington's polished exterior, old grudges, quiet rivalries, and power plays that shaped every handshake and headline. As a young activist took the stage to speak about economic equity, John's thoughts circled back to that single word Jill had used, opportunist. It gnawed at him, not because he believed it, but because it mirrored the cynicism eroding trust in public service. He'd spent years fighting for Louisiana, pushing for tax reform and disaster relief, often against intense opposition, and he wasn't about to let anyone diminish that, not even Jill Biden. He wasn't perfect, but he'd always tried to serve with integrity. To be reduced to a caricature in a whispered insult felt like a betrayal, not just of him, but of the people who depended on him. The program paused for intermission, and the ballroom erupted into excited chatter. Guests clustered together, whispering about the confrontation, their voices buzzing with shock, amusement, and disbelief. As John stepped off the stage, a small circle of supporters gathered around him, clapping him on the shoulder with approving grins. "You put her in her place, Senator," one woman murmured, her voice breathless with admiration. John nodded, offering a polite smile, but there was no satisfaction in his chest, only a heavy sense of responsibility. This wasn't about scoring points. What mattered was what came next. As he walked toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, his aide, Clara, sharp-eyed and steady, hurried toward him, tablet glowing in her hands. "Senator, you're trending everywhere," she said, equal parts impressed and concerned. "People are calling it the showdown of the year. But, there's more." She handed him the tablet. On the screen was a grainy photo of a document posted anonymously on X, purporting to be a government contract approved without proper oversight. At the bottom was a signature tied directly to someone in Jill's inner circle. John's eyes narrowed as he scanned the page. It outlined a $750,000 payment to a consulting firm for something called strategic outreach, a vague description that raised immediate red flags. The contract dated back to a period already clouded by controversy over federal spending transparency. He handed the tablet back, his voice low but firm. "Find everything you can on this." Quietly. Clara nodded and immediately began typing, her fingers flying. John knew the danger of chasing a lead like this. Washington was woven with traps disguised as opportunities, and one wrong move could destroy a career. But ignoring something like this was worse. If the document was genuine, it pointed to a breach of public trust that could affect thousands of Americans. When the summit resumed, John returned to his seat. The next speaker, a tech entrepreneur, launched into a monologue about innovation, but the words slid past him unheard. His mind drifted to Louisiana, fishermen, farmers, veterans, working families, people who had written him, called him, trusted him. People who counted on him to fight for fairness. If this document exposed a pattern of misconduct, he had to pursue it. But he'd need allies, and he'd need proof. He scanned the room, recognizing friendly senators, aides, and even a reporter he trusted. He would need them when the storm broke. Across the stage, Jill sat stiffly, her hands knotted in her lap, her smile frozen in place. Her aides hovered close, whispering urgently, their faces pale as they showed her the trending hashtags. Jill pressed her lips together and waved them off. She hadn't expected John to hit back so sharply. And she definitely hadn't expected a leaked document to enter the picture. She'd intended her remark as a private jab, an outlet for her frustration with his relentless criticism of policies she'd helped champion, but now everything was spiraling beyond her control. She glanced at John, who appeared fully focused on the speaker, his expression unreadable. For the first time, she realized she might have underestimated him. The summit pushed on, but the tension thickened. Guests whispered behind their programs, eyes darting from John to Jill. Sensing the shift, the moderators hurried through the remaining speeches, eager to avoid further eruptions. when John's turn finally came to speak, the entire room leaned forward. He rose slowly, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the podium with measured confidence. The room fell silent as he adjusted the microphone. "I came here tonight to talk about unity," he began, his Louisiana drawl softening his tone. "But unity doesn't mean pretending everything's fine. It means facing what's wrong, with courage and with honesty." A low murmur of agreement swept the room. John's eyes moved across the crowd, pausing briefly on Jill. "I've been called a lot of things in my time," he said with a faint, wry smile. "But I've never backed down from a fight when the truth is on the line." Applause thundered through the ballroom. He lifted a hand to quiet them. "Tonight we've seen how fast words can divide us. But they can also light the way to change. I don't know where tonight leads, but I promise you this, I'll keep asking the hard questions. Because the people deserve answers." He stepped back as applause surged again, louder, stronger. Jill sat frozen, her face pale, gripping her chair as cameras zoomed in. Social media erupted all over again. Clips of John's speech spread like wildfire, celebrated by some, dissected by others, debated by all, and the leaked document, it was already gaining traction. As the summit wound down, whispers about John's name grew louder, fueling speculation about his next move. Slipping out a side door to avoid the swarm of reporters at the main exit, he found Clara waiting, tablet clutched tightly in her hands. "We've got a lead on the document," she said quietly. "A whistleblower. Someone from procurement. They're willing to talk, but they're scared." John nodded, face hardening. "Set it up. And pull everything we have on that consulting firm." He climbed into the waiting car. City lights smeared past the windows as messages buzzed non-stop, support from colleagues, questions from reporters, even a text from an old friend in Louisiana. "You stirred the hornet's nest, John. Proud of you." He managed a faint smile, but his mind was elsewhere. The leaked document was only the start, just one thread in a much larger web. He didn't know how deep it went, only that he couldn't stop now. Back at the convention center, Jill lingered in a private room while aides rushed to craft a statement. "Call it a misunderstanding," one suggested. Jill shook her head, exhaustion in her voice. "It's too late. He owns the narrative now." She sank into a chair, replaying the moment she'd whispered those words to him. She'd meant to rattle him, to remind him of his place. Instead, she'd given him a megaphone. Whether the leaked contract was linked to her or not, the story had already escaped her control. She closed her eyes as the weight of the night settled on her. Outside, the city buzzed with news coverage, hashtags, and headlines spreading like wildfire. John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, had turned a single insult into a rallying cry, and the country was listening. In the hours after, the story exploded. Clips of John's sharp response looped endlessly on TV. Pundits debated its significance. Everyday Americans chimed in online. A teacher in Ohio wrote, "Kennedy says what we're all thinking." A trucker in Texas posted, "Finally someone calling out the elite. Go get John." Meanwhile, the unverified document leak unleashed a frenzy of internet investigators digging into the consulting firm's ties to Washington insiders. Back in his office, John sat with Clara and a small team, sorting through files. A name, belonging to a mid-level former official turned whistleblower, was scrawled on a notepad beside tomorrow's meeting time. John leaned back, fingers steepled, already tracing the path ahead. This wasn't about Jill anymore. It wasn't even about him. It was about truth, and the people who had suffered without it. He didn't know where this trail ended, but he was ready to follow it at any cost. Fluorescent lights hummed softly through John Kennedy's Senate office, a modest room cluttered with legal pads, coffee mugs, and framed photos of Louisiana's bayous. It was long past midnight. The city outside sat under a restless silence, but inside, purpose simmered in the air. John, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, studied a pile of printed emails and financial statements. Clara stood at a whiteboard covered in notes about the leaked $750,000 contract that had set the internet ablaze after his confrontation with Jill Biden at the Unity for America Women's Summit. The contract was just the surface. And John knew it. The viral moment had pushed him into the spotlight, but the real work began now. This wasn't about trending clips or political points. It was about uncovering a system of lies that had cost real people their livelihoods, their trust, and in some cases, far more. Clara tapped the board. The whistleblower is ready for tomorrow. But they're nervous. We need to move carefully. John nodded. Careful, yes. Silent, no. Keep digging. By morning, Washington buzzed with speculation. The leaked contract, now dubbed the Summit Scandal, dominated every news channel. Some hailed John as a hero, others a showman. But the public was locked onto the implications of that document. Social media erupted. Amateur investigators dissected screenshots. People shared stories of hardship connected to government mismanagement. That a retired nurse from Baton Rouge posted, "My husband's VA benefits were delayed for years. Now I wonder if that money went to some consultant's yacht." A factory worker from Shreveport tweeted, "Kennedy's fighting for us. About time someone asked where our tax dollars go." Sitting in a Capitol Hill diner, John sipped black coffee while scrolling through post after post. Each one strengthened his resolve. The summit had lit the match, but the fire burning now belonged to the American people, demanding answers. The whistleblower, a thin, nervous man in his late 40s named Paul Grayson, met John and Clara in a plain, nearly empty coffee shop in Alexandria. A former procurement officer, Paul kept fidgeting with his napkin, eyes flicking toward the entrance every few seconds. "I didn't want to be here," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. "But after your speech, Senator, I couldn't stay quiet. People got hurt." He slid a USB drive across the table. Inside it, a digital treasure trove, emails, memos, spreadsheets, all outlining a chain of contracts funneled through the same consulting firm. The total exceeded $2 million, the signatures were all digital, approved without clear oversight, each linked to a network of intermediaries connected to Washington power brokers. Paul leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. This wasn't sloppy paperwork. It was intentional. They knew the money wasn't reaching the programs it was meant for. John's grip tightened around the drive. "Who's they, Paul?" A tense silence followed before Paul listed several mid-level officials. "Not famous, but tied to people who were." "I don't know how high it goes," he admitted. "But I saw enough to know it's wrong." Back at the office, Clara and a small circle of trusted staff began cross-checking Paul's files with public databases. The consulting firm, Apex Strategies, might as well have been a ghost. A template website. A Delaware P.O. box. No real footprint, yet its contracts stretched across multiple federal agencies, from veteran services to disaster relief. One spreadsheet listed a $300,000 payment for community outreach in a Louisiana parish still recovering from a hurricane. But residents John contacted confirmed no outreach ever happened. The deeper they dug, the clearer the pattern became. Money intended for vulnerable communities was being siphoned away, replaced with vague reports and inflated invoices. Clara pinned a map to the wall, marking every Apex project. The scattered points formed a constellation of betrayal reaching across the country. John paced, frustration sharp in his voice. "This isn't just money. These are people waiting for help that never came. We need names, Clara. Real names, not shell companies." But pushing forward came with consequences. By midweek, John's office was overwhelmed with calls, some supportive, others hostile. An anonymous email warned, "Drop this, Senator, or you'll regret it." A senior colleague, known for playing both sides, pulled John aside in the Capitol's marble hallway. "You're kicking a hornet's nest," he said, tone paternal but shadowed with threat. "This could end your career." John didn't flinch. "If fighting for the truth ends my career, then it wasn't a career worth having." The senator walked away shaking his head, but John felt his resolve deepen. He wasn't naive about Washington's secrets and trade-offs. But he also couldn't forget the people back home, the widowed teacher, the disabled veteran, the single mother still waiting for FEMA aid that never came. These weren't statistics. They were the reason he was here. Clara uncovered a breakthrough, an email thread between an Apex consultant and a low-level official at the Department of Health and Human Services. The official, a woman named Diane Carter, had flagged major discrepancies in a $500,000 contract for medical supplies, supplies that never reached rural clinics. Her messages grew more desperate. "We're failing these communities. Please. We need to audit this." The response was cold. "Diane, focus on your assigned tasks." Now retired, Diane agreed to meet John in a quiet park near the tidal basin. Her hands shook as she passed him a folder. "I tried to stop it," she whispered, voice cracking. "But they made it clear my job was on the line." Inside the folder were copies of her ignored complaints and a single sheet listing 3 Apex contracts tied to different agencies. Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm sorry I didn't do more." John placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We're doing it now. That's what matters." The evidence was piling up, but John knew documents alone wouldn't change a corrupt system. He needed allies, and he needed the public's voice. That he met with a bipartisan group of senators, a young progressive from Minnesota and a seasoned conservative from Texas, both respected for their integrity. In a late-night meeting, John laid out the evidence, the USB drive glowing under the conference room lights like a warning beacon. The Minnesota senator frowned. "How do we stop this from getting buried?" "We don't," John said. "We make it impossible to bury. We go public, not with accusations but with questions. Let the people demand the truth." The Texas senator nodded, jaw tight. "I'm in. But we'll need more than paperwork. We need real stories. Real people. Real pain." Inspired, John's team launched a secure hotline. Within days, calls poured in. A firefighter in Oklahoma described how disaster relief funds promised after a tornado never arrived, leaving his town to fend for itself. Rebuild alone. A nurse from rural Georgia spoke about patients dying while waiting for subsidized care, their applications swallowed by a bureaucratic void. Every story was another strand in a widening tapestry, and John felt the weight of each one. He spent hours listening, his notepad filling with names, dates, and heartbreaks, his resolve hardening with every call point. One evening, a soft-spoken woman named Maria called from New Orleans. Her voice shook as she described her son, a veteran who died waiting for mental health services. "They told us the funding was there," she said, choking back tears. "But it wasn't. Senator, please don't let this happen to someone else." John's throat tightened. "We're fighting for you, Maria," he told her gently. "For all of them." The public response was electric. Grassroots groups began organizing small but fiery rallies outside federal buildings. A viral video captured a group of veterans in Missouri holding signs that read, "Where's our money?" A college student in California launched a petition demanding a congressional audit, and it gathered 50,000 signatures in just 48 hours. John, mindful of not fueling division, saw a chance to channel the momentum. He agreed to a primetime interview with respected journalist Maria Vasquez, whose sharp, no-nonsense style made her one of the most trusted voices in the country. Broadcast live from a studio overlooking the Capitol, the interview became a turning point. "Senator, you've kicked up a storm, Vasquez said, eyes locked on him. But critics say you're chasing attention, not truth. What's your endgame? John leaned forward, voice steady and sincere. My endgame is simple, answers. People trusted their government, and that trust was broken. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to find out what happened and make sure it never happens again. He shared Maria's story, careful to protect her identity, and spoke of the firefighter, the nurse, and countless others. Their voices flowed through his. He lifted a redacted copy of the Apex contract, its key details blurred but its existence unmistakable. This isn't about one company or one official, he said. It's about a system that allowed these contracts to sail through while real people suffered. The interview struck a national nerve. Viewers flooded X with messages of support. The hashtag #TruthWithKennedy shot to the top of trending lists. A retired teacher wrote, "I've never seen a politician talk like that, so real, so human." Even skeptics took notice. John wasn't grandstanding or hunting villains. He was simply asking questions, and America was ready to ask with him. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. Clara received a tip about a second whistleblower, an ex-Apex employee willing to testify anonymously. Their information pointed to a closed-door meeting where officials discussed streamlining contract approvals, essentially bypassing oversight. Knowing the stakes were rising, John met with his Senate allies to strategize. They agreed to draft a resolution calling for an independent audit of federal contracts, a move that would force the issue into daylight, but John knew legislation alone wouldn't heal anything. People needed to see him. To speak. To be heard. Against Clara's firm warning, he announced an open town hall in Louisiana for anyone harmed by government mismanagement. It's risky, Clara cautioned. The media will swarm, and so will your critics. John smiled, resolve shining in his eyes. Good. Let them come. The truth doesn't hide from a crowd. As the town hall drew near, his office transformed into a war room. Staffers sifted through hundreds of RSVPs, each accompanied by a story of loss. A young law student volunteer named Ethan read one aloud, his voice cracking. It was from a widower whose wife had died after a delayed surgery, the hospital blaming funding shortages. Ethan looked up, eyes brimming. "Senator, how do you keep going, knowing how many people are hurting?" John paused, letting the moment settle before he spoke softly. "Because if I stop their stories, then I stop too. And I won't let that happen." Silence swept through the room, his words landing with a weight none of them could ignore. They weren't just a team anymore. They had become a movement, united by a mission to expose the places where shadows had grown too deep. As the chapter closed, John stood by his office window, the Capitol dome glowing faintly in the distance. His phone buzzed. A message from Paul, the whistleblower. "More documents coming. Stay safe." John's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from a sharpened resolve. The summit had been a spark, a moment of public defiance. But this was the real battle. The truth was scattered across forgotten files, whispered in hallways, tucked away in stories long ignored. He didn't know how far the trail would lead or what price he would pay. But one thing was certain, he was all in. The people deserved answers, and he would chase them, one document, one voice, one step at a time. The Louisiana sun hung low over the Baton Rouge Community Center, casting long shadows across the parking lot where a modest crowd gathered. It was a stark contrast to the glittering chandeliers of the Unity for America Women's Summit, but to John Kennedy, this was where real work lived. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in a semicircle, filled with a cross-section of America, veterans in faded caps, single mothers clutching worn purses, retirees with trembling hands, and young activists with hopeful eyes. They had come for the town hall John had promised, drawn by his call for truth after his viral clash with Jill Biden and the mounting evidence of misused government funds. The air was thick with anticipation, not for spectacle, but for something rarer, a chance to be heard. John stood at the front. No podium. No suit jacket. Just rolled up sleeves and a microphone. His warm Louisiana drawl cut gently through the room. "Tonight isn't about me," he began, meeting the eyes of a gray-haired woman in the front row. "It's about you. Your stories. Your losses. Your fight. Let's talk." The room leaned in. And with that, the final chapter of this saga began, not with confrontation or investigations, but with connection, accountability, and the quiet promise of healing. John had spent the weeks since the summit building a case, gathering whistleblower testimony and contract records that revealed a systemic failure. The leaked Apex Strategies documents, now verified by independent auditors, had ignited a national conversation, rallies, petitions, demands for reform, but John knew documents alone couldn't heal wounds. The people in this room, and millions like them, needed more than proof. They needed to know their pain mattered. He invited the first speaker, a retired firefighter named Carl. Carl's voice trembled as he described his town's struggle to rebuild after a flood, promised FEMA funds that never arrived, while Apex pocketed hundreds of thousands for consulting. "We lost homes. Businesses. Hope," Carl said, eyes glistening. "And I'm here because you, Senator, asked the question we couldn't: where'd the money go?" The room erupted into gentle, heartfelt applause, a release of years of frustration. John placed a steady hand on Carl's shoulder, then passed the microphone to Lena, a nurse who spoke of patients turned away from underfunded clinics. One by one they stood, teachers, veterans, parents, each story a wound, each voice a step toward reclaiming dignity. Outside, a handful of reporters live-streamed the event, their cameras capturing something raw and unpolished. Social media, still buzzing from the hashtag #TruthWithKennedy movement, amplified the testimonies. A college student in Ohio wrote, "This isn't politics. This is people finally being seen." A grandmother in Nevada posted, "I cried watching that nurse. Kennedy's giving us a voice." The town hall wasn't just a local gathering. It was a mirror held up to a nation grappling with betrayal. John listened to every speaker. His notepad forgotten. His focus absolute. When Jamal, speaking about his brother who had died waiting for VA mental health care, broke down mid-sentence, John stepped toward him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Take your time, son," he said softly. "We're all here." Jamal finished his story, and the room rose to its feet in a standing ovation, not for John, but for the courage it took to speak. In that moment, John understood this was bigger than any contract or scandal. It was about restoring trust, not just in government, but in each other. The town hall stretched on, but no one left. When the last speaker, an elderly widow named Rose, finished describing her husband's denied pension, John took the microphone. His voice was steady, yet thick with emotion. "I've heard you tonight," he said. "And I promise you, we're not done. This isn't about pointing fingers or settling scores. This is about making sure no one else sits in a room like this feeling forgotten." He announced plans for a bipartisan Senate task force to audit federal contracts, a proposal already gaining momentum in Congress. More importantly, he pledged to keep holding town halls, to keep listening. "Truth isn't a one-time fix," he said. "It's a commitment." The applause came again, but what mattered were their eyes, filled with gratitude, determination, and a flicker of hope. As the event wound down, people lingered, shaking John's hand, showing photos of loved ones lost to systemic failures. Rose pressed a faded military medal into his palm and whispered, "For my husband. Keep fighting." John nodded, swallowing hard, and slipped the medal into his pocket, a reminder of what was at stake. By the next morning, Washington felt different. The town hall, aired on local stations and shared widely online, cut through the noise of partisan bickering. John's office was flooded with emails from across the country, please, thank yous, and stories. Clara, sorting through the messages, looked up, eyes wide. "Senator, this is changing things. People aren't just angry, they're inspired." John gave a faint smile, but his mind was already on what came next. He met with his Senate allies, the Minnesota Progressive and the Texas Conservative, to finalize the audit resolution. The meeting was tense. Some senators feared political backlash, but John's resolve didn't waver. "This isn't about left or right," he said firmly. "It's about right and wrong. We owe these people action." The resolution passed committee that afternoon, a rare bipartisan win, and news outlets hailed it as a turning point. Still, John knew the real challenge was ahead, making sure the audit led to accountability, not another stack of reports collecting dust. Meanwhile, Jill Biden, silent since the summit, faced growing pressure. The Apex contracts, though not connected to her directly, had implicated aides from her husband's administration. Her team tried to frame the summit confrontation as a misunderstanding, but the public wasn't buying it. Posts on X called for answers, with hashtags like #JillSpeakUp trending alongside #TruthWithKennedy. Finally, she agreed to speak. Standing alone at a podium in a Delaware community center, her hands trembled slightly as she began. Her voice was measured, but heavy. "I said something at the summit that I regret," she admitted. "I called Senator Kennedy an opportunist, and that was wrong. More than that, I stood by while systems failed the people I swore to serve." She paused, her eyes glistening. "I didn't sign those contracts, but I didn't ask enough questions. For that, I'm sorry." She looked directly into the camera, her voice breaking. "Senator Kennedy, you've shown what courage looks like. I hope we can all learn from it." The statement landed like a shockwave. Commentators argued over whether Jill's words came from sincerity or political necessity, but for John, it was simply a step in the right direction. He watched the broadcast from his office, Clara and Ethan close by. "She didn't have to do that," Clara murmured. John nodded, thoughtful. "No. She didn't. But it's a start." He didn't boast, didn't rush to the cameras. Instead, he penned Jill a private note, thanking her for her honesty and urging her to support the audit. It was a small gesture, but one that revealed his intentions clearly. This wasn't about revenge. It was about repair. The public took notice. A viral post on X read, "Kennedy could have dragged her. Instead, he showed grace." That's leadership. The national conversation began shifting, away from outrage and toward reform. As the audit task force launched its work, John kept his attention on the people. He moved from town to town across the South, holding more town halls, each one filled with stories stitched together by hardship. In Alabama, a mechanic described how a consulting deal drained funds from their community center, leaving local kids with nowhere safe to go. In Mississippi, a teacher described classrooms so empty of books that children shared photocopies of photocopies, while Apex billed for educational services. John listened to every story, asking questions, offering clarity, and something more. He offered honesty. At a gathering in Georgia, he admitted, "There are days I wonder if we're moving fast enough, if I'm doing enough. But your voices, they keep me going." His vulnerability resonated deeply. A young mother posted, "He's not just a senator, he's human." That's why I believe him. The town halls grew beyond him, transforming into a movement grounded in the belief that truth could rebuild what corruption had shattered. As the audit uncovered $4 million in misallocated funds across multiple agencies, pressure mounted on Congress. A new bill, the Transparency in Contracting Act, was introduced, requiring public disclosure of federal contracts and enforcing tougher oversight. John co-sponsored it, spending late nights refining the language. At a Capitol Hill press conference, he stood with lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. "This bill isn't the end," he said. "It's the beginning. We're telling every American, your tax dollars matter, and so do you." Reporters applauded, but his gaze drifted toward a small group he'd invited, Carl, Rose, and others whose stories had shaped the movement. Their quiet pride said more than any headline ever could. The bill passed the Senate weeks later. It was more than legislation, it was proof that people's voices could redirect the country. The chapter reached its emotional peak at a candlelight vigil on the National Mall, organized by grassroots groups inspired by the town halls. Thousands gathered, holding candles and photos of loved ones lost to systemic failures. Veterans, families, patients, each face a reminder of why the fight mattered. John had been asked to speak, but he insisted on beginning with names. A roll call of the forgotten. Carl Thompson, he read. Firefighter. Lost his home to a flood. Lena Harris. Nurse. Fought for her patients. Jamal's brother. Veteran. Deserved better. With every name, a wave of candlelight washed through the crowd, thousands of flames rising in silent promise. When John finally spoke, his voice was soft but unwavering. "Truth hurts," he said. "But it also heals. These past months, we've uncovered pain, but we've also discovered strength. In you. In each other. This vigil isn't the end of our work. It's a pledge to keep going, to build a government that serves, not steals." He lifted his candle. And thousands followed, transforming the mall into a sea of stars. Somewhere in the crowd, a little girl clutched her mother's hand and whispered, "He's talking about us." Her mother nodded, tears streaming, and posted a photo captioned, "Tonight, we were heard." The vigil became a national turning point. The Transparency Act, though imperfect, marked real progress, and the audit exposed more firms like Apex. Jill Biden, honoring her promise, testified before the task force, her candor earning even reluctant respect, but the true legacy lay in the people. Communities formed oversight groups. Students created apps to track federal spending. Families shared their stories without fear. Back in Louisiana, John sat in his office with Rose's medal resting on his desk. A letter from Jamal arrived, thanking him for giving meaning to his brother's death. John read it twice, his eyes misting, then placed it carefully with the others. That he wasn't finished, not by a long shot. More town halls waited. More reforms. More stories still needed to be heard, but for the first time in months, he felt a rare, quiet peace. The lesson was clear: truth, though costly, is the bedrock of justice. Every voice can spark change. And in a noisy world, listening, truly listening, is the greatest act of leadership. The story closed not with victory, but with a call to action. "This isn't just my fight," John had said at the vigil. "It's ours." He urged the crowd to vote, to question, to speak up, reminding them that democracy survives only when citizens demand integrity. For everyone watching, it was a lesson in leadership. Not the kind built on perfection, but on persistence. On courage. On choosing, day after day, to do what is right, even when it costs something. As the last candles flickered out, America felt a shift, not toward division, but toward a shared resolve to heal, rebuild, and never again allow the truth to be buried.